I find out on cases that I have who's on the distribution list, people in the Lawyers Disciplinary Board and the U.S. Attorney's Office getting copies of my cases, looking at what I file and what I do. Let me tell you what, if those idiots think that the war hasn't started again or that it's over, I will fight 1,000 years if I have to. I'm not going to quit. This stuff has got to stop for the sake of my country. Something needs to reform the system. And now I've got a group of judges that are trying to do anything that they can to stop my practice. And it's improper, and I think it's unlawful. They will find some way to stop the work I'm doing, and people will not have an attorney to go to that will really fight against the system. But I'll tell you, in those days when this stuff was going on, it's just impossible to describe the constant harassment and attempts of intimidation by these people who had absolutely no reason to do it. And because I was the outsider who would stand up and try to do the right thing and say no and stop this, it's constant attacks and abuse.
I want to ask you something. You said earlier that when the FBI, who you think were the FBI, were walking around the house, and you told your girlfriend, you know, you had a carbine and all that, and it all stopped. So
well, I gave it to her.
Obviously, your phones were being tapped?
Clearly.
Okay, are they still being tapped, do you think?
Well,
I mean, illegally tapped, right? They didn't have a warrant.
No.
So this is exactly
I'm sure there was no
what the
warrant.
Patriot Act just extended, was their ability to
See,
tap your
they
phone,
can well, if you came to my office on a daily basis, in my home for periods of time, ringbacks, picking up a telephone, there's no dial tone. People that know this kind of work tell me that these are non-warranted intrusions. I don't know who's doing that. I'm going to be very honest with you. I don't think it's the federal people. I think it's coming from the Pennsylvania State Police, but I can't prove that, and I don't know. And the reason is I represent dozens of Pennsylvania State Police officers who are seeking First Amendment help in the system. To be honest with you, after you live through this for a while, you know, you don't really care. I mean, sometimes you're on the phone and you feel like saying, hey, asshole, want to listen in? Or, you know, come on over and sit down and join the crowd. Or something. Because
get a real job.
Yeah, you can't let, you know, you can't let it put you down. You know, you got a fellow back there right now who's lived through enough of this, and he is far more reticent to assume it's these people, I think, than I am. But he hasn't lived with it as long, and it hasn't affected him as much. But
I was with you when we went to the federal building.
oh yeah, there you go. There you go. There you go. I am one of the attorneys who represented Filegate Tony. You know who Filegate Tony is? Tony Marcisa, the guy that they were making the big deal out of in the federal system, who went in and supposedly had information on President Clinton, etc. They do a little grand jury deal down there. They use the speech and debate clause. Fascinating legal analysis. To avoid being liable for the abuses or the excesses they're directing at Tony Marcisa. I'm one of his lawyers. You know, he came to me, I advised him. When the FBI came to get him, he called me and I said, you put that son of a bitch on the phone. And he got on the phone and I did what I had to do. He'll be down to this. And the guy, I was being a tough guy. I sort of felt bad because the agent on the other end of the line was nice. He was from Washington. He was a very polite and courteous man, and he treated me well. And he disarmed me, and we had a nice talk, and we did what we had to do. I'm in my office in Harrisburg. What happens is that Tony comes back, and he says, hey, Don, he had been down in Texas on some business. He says, hey, Don, he said, you know, I called your office when I was down some place in Texas and needed to talk to you. And when I dialed your number, it went into the federal courthouse. First of all, they don't have a number down there like mine, but they do have the same exchange. So I took Andy down with me as a witness. I found out whose office it went into, and I think it was Gary Hollinger, who's on the clerk's staff in the federal building in Harrisburg. I said, Gary, I don't know what's going on here, but my phone number is being answered in your office. This guy was unaffected, didn't care, listened to us. I said, you may want to check into that. So then I went back, and I think I did like a little memo or letter, and I sent it to Judge Caldwell. And I also sent him a copy of a tape, a guy that had worked with Andy. I go home, I had a tape message machine, a phone message machine, that ran for 28, 30 minutes, something like that. His conversation with a young lady from our office in his car, overhearing their conversation, including when he came back to the office and went upstairs to Andy's office, was on my home telephone. So, we got his phone records. Guess what? He never called me. He didn't call me. Somebody was playing a game with those phones. Judge Caldwell's, I think it was his secretary, called back and says, the judge says, what's he supposed to do with it? I said, I don't know that he can do anything. I just want to be able to say I told somebody. And I said, he's the only man I know I can trust. That's
sad.
It's horrible.
That's sad.
It's horrible. And I didn't hear anything else from him because there was nothing he could do. I was just doing it to notify him of what was going on. Then we come back up the office, and I'm suing again on behalf of state police officers. They put my wife, pictures of her, I mean, the most insulting stuff in a summary judgment that had nothing to do with the case.
The police did this?
The state police lawyers did this. It's just one piece of harassment after another because I'm bucking the system. This really encapsulates the whole thing. 4 state narcotics agents who worked for the state attorney general. They went around for almost 2 years, very close to statute of limitations. And they could not find a lawyer or a law firm that would represent them or take their case. Nobody would do it. So they ended up going to Sam Stratton and to Ed Martino. Ed was a guy I told you about who's from Lancaster, just a incredibly decent, honest guy, one of the finest people I've ever known in my life. And he really tries to stand up for people. So he made more difference. When I was being abused, he met with me, we went over things, and I just felt downtrodden. And he decided he was going to help me. I mean, I will always look up to him. He and Sam got together. They had this thing for 2 or 3 months. And Sam put his hands in the air, he said, there's only one person that can do this case. He says, I can't make hiding her hair out of this or know how to deal with this and stuff, because Sam was a criminal lawyer. He wasn't versed in that kind of stuff. So they come to see me, and we start working. I ended up producing a complaint, 200 and some paragraphs, and the judge in this case referred to my complaint as prolix, P-R-O, wordy. In response, I did 19 straight words, all beginning with the same letter. And the judge that got the case to review it was Judge Richard Caputo, who is absolutely one of the most decent, most fair, and erudite judges I've ever known. He really is. All I could picture later on, because I never discussed it with him, he must have looked at that, and unlike these other people, he saw the humor in it. And I could just picture him just roaring, because the tagline was, it's a real challenge when you provide U.S. attorneys with more information than they can digest and understand, because they were protesting under Rule 8, which is to write a concise, and it wasn't concise. It was fact-filled on purpose, because I knew what they were going to do. Anyway, litigation, we go through litigation on this stuff, and we end up in trial in Luzerne County in the courthouse. Sam Stratton is a trial lawyer. I'm the assistant. I'm doing the different kind of motion stuff, and Sam did an absolutely brilliant job as an attorney. He's just a very fine lawyer. The other side didn't do too well. And when the jury came back, they came back with $1.5 million in damages for my guys. Yeah, it's the funniest story because I jumped and I had to go home because I had kids. I had to jump and I'm going down the highway in the van. In fact, Tony Marcisa was with me. Tony was driving. Adrian's sitting in the back. It's my wife. The phone rings. All I could hear is Adrian, and she starts to cry. 250,000, 500,000, 750,000, $1 million, 1,250,000. $1,500,000. The jury said they were never so upset and disappointed to hear what these federal officials had done. The lead defendant in that case was the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, Michael Fisher. When this case gets appealed to the Third Circuit, guess who's sitting on the Third Circuit? Michael Fisher was appointed to the Third Circuit. Judge Caputo gave us a fair and honest trial. He made fair and honest decisions, and they were proper decisions. They designed this opinion in the Third Circuit so that a summary judgment, you couldn't even go back and redo the summary judgment to get a retrial. They took that entire verdict away. And saying, in effect, that there was not enough evidence, there's summary judgment material or whatever. And yet we had an exhibit, Exhibit 15, which was a memo where they had checked down what they can do to these guys, how they can get at them, how they could punish them, where they could send them. And they did unbelievable things to him. Michael Fisher, and I'd known him a number of years. Not real well, but I knew him. And we're standing outside the courthouse, the courtroom, and I says, you know, Mike, I really feel bad about this. He said, nope. He says, you have to do what you have to do. He says, don't feel that way. But when Michael Fisher went in and testified, he told the truth. He owed up, he told the truth, he said he approved what those people did, and I came away with a great respect for Michael Fisher. I can't say as much for the assistant U.S. attorney, who we also sued, because I don't think he was like Mr. Fisher, okay? That is an example of cases, case after case after case. We've got a federal judge down here that's dismissed 20-some straight complaints that I filed. 20-some.
It took 20 complaints to get
over 20 cases just dismissed. Discovery not allowed. Sanctions me for attorney's fees. It's just an unbelievable story, and unless we get to some reform in this country where, as an American citizen, you can go and get some kind of opinion or recourse on judicial misconduct, we're not going to have a free country. Because lawyers who want to represent people properly and completely and fairly are afraid to do anything that brings the ire of these judges against them. And there are judges out there that are great. They listen to arguments. They give you a chance to present yourself. I've never had a single problem with it. Three little clique of judges are just out to destroy my practice.
Which ones?
Judge Connor, Judge Christopher C. Connor, Judge Yvette Kane, and Judge John E. Jones III. I wrote a writ of certiorari, which I submitted on behalf of myself. I know I did not get a chance to give you a copy of this so you could read it. And it basically lays out one sordid tale of what occurred in that case. It's not about me. It's not about, they would like to make it be about me and my excesses.
Right?
Yeah. The story is far more important than one lawyer. It's far more important than me. It's about the nation, the relationship between the courts and our other institutions. It's about basically whether the federal court system can discipline itself, which it cannot. It's about Congress accepting the responsibility under Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution to come out and do something about these abuses. And by the way, if you think that this is one complaint you're hearing here, there are all kinds of groups and people that are just fed up and sick and tired of these abuses. On the web, I am a great admirer of Martin Luther King. Here's an example of a guy who's victimized by the greatest criminal in American history, J. Edgar Hoover. A flat-out crook, a demented, abusive, bureaucratic official who in some ways, may have taken this nation as close to a police state as it's ever been, if it's not there today. Martin Luther King was primarily interested and involved in issues having to do with racial mistreatment. But the point is, his First Amendment rights, his right to be free of government abuse, those are things that they took away. And I'm old enough, you folks are younger than me. I lived through that period in the civil rights era. I remember the 1964 election, Barry Goldwater, the Dixiecrats. I mean, I remember those kind of things going on. One of the greatest inhibitors of the expression of American rights and liberties were federal courts in the South. You know, I'm real proud because when you look at that Eyes on the Prize, that great documentary, it's done about trying to get civil rights, etc., those paratroopers marching down those streets. You hate to see that. But there's a little girl, a little tiny black girl trying to go to school. There are those soldiers, 101st Airborne Division. Standing up for those rights. And these people are not going to take them away. So in my twisted, demented mind, it all comes together. I'm tired of being harassed. I'm tired of being abused. But 1,000 times worse than that, I am sick and tired of having American citizens come to me and being denied the right to access their courts. And those courts do not belong to a special enclave of supercilious officials. And the tragedy of this whole thing is that there are so many fine, decent judges who are fair, so many that have been fair to me and have been fair to my clients, and they're stupid enough to think they're going to intimidate me, and they're not going to. They're not going to intimidate me. I'm somebody, the military background, come from a backwoods kind of a family. I know my firearms, I know my ballistics, and I went to bed night after night with a gun, not knowing what they were doing, who was at a window, who's making rattling noises constantly. It's like when my girlfriend was being harassed, you know, I'd jump in the car, drive over there, they'd drive up behind me in a car and break off. I knew it was those FBI agents. I knew darn well it was them. And then I made the comments about sneaking up behind the garage and laying for them. And, you know, I said, don't worry. I said, I won't kill them. I'll just, you know.
Just going to wound them.
Just going to, yeah. I said, you know, I said, I've been through this before. It's no big deal. Not one more incident. Not one more incident. Cowards.
You said that.
I mean, they're just cowards. Yeah. Well, I did it as a prop to get them to stop harassing her.
Yeah.
And then she had to, and then they heard that I had a camera and flashballs. I said, just get pictures. What? Never showed up again. I go out to a fast food restaurant. There's a guy in a car, like a big Lincoln kind of car, black, and he's flashing his lights at me. I drove around, and she was with me. I don't want to mention her name because I don't want her. But she was with me. She was my girlfriend at the time. Like I said, we were very close. And I go back around. Anyway, I got the license number off of this car. This car ended up being registered to a vacant lot in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. I take it over to Leroy Zimmerman to get a report. I get a report back that it was mistaken identity. They thought I was a contact. I mean, this is what they said to me. I mean, I think it was absurd, because I even did a make on the guy that was in the car, and it was an assistant attorney general. You know,
Assistant Attorney General was in the car
yes,
following you?
Registered to a vacant lot.
registered to a vacant lot in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. You know, it could have been an honest mistake. It could have been. I mean, you don't know. Maybe it's true. I mean, you know, it's hard to believe they would be that dumb, but when you find out the kind of stuff that they did and how often they did it, you had a hard time believing that, you know, because it's all just goes on your mind. You go out someplace, you're being followed. You see some guy popping up and and putting his handkerchief in his pocket, you know, but it's corny. It's like watching movies. And then you cease being afraid of it anymore, and you just fight back. You go back at them. I came up with information they couldn't believe. I came up with a list that was in a car that had the distribution. One of the people they were covering for was passing out cocaine. And I think that when the FBI learned that I knew that, and they knew that I was providing information to our inspector, that's when I think they made the decision to indict and prosecute Richard Gaida and Henry Barr. You know, it's funny, when Marty Carlson attacks me in the written attack that he did in his Third Circuit smear of me in his report and recommendation, he begins to see through me, I think. And he says in there, this is stuff that he's been doing, he's been manipulating this stuff for years. And I felt like writing back to him, you know, Marty, you're right. And because of your stupidity and because of your dishonesty, I've succeeded. And you put all those years into wiretapping me and following me and trying to get at me because you view me as a political opponent, that you think somehow the line's going to be drawn and you're going to intimidate me and you're going to get me to stop. They ain't never going to do it. Never, because you know, I'm just one of many. Lord knows how many people. You know, Bud Dwyer, before he killed himself, Bud was a good friend of mine. About 2 weeks before he committed suicide on camera, downstairs, first floor of the finance building, we talked about why Thornburg was getting at him. And it's funny because we found a common nucleus around the disclosure of the corruption on the truck deals, because there was a group of people that had to approve the bond issue, the investment issues, to make that deal possible. And Bud Dwyer voted no. He voted not to let that go through. And they made this big thing that Thornburg went after Bud. Dwyer refused to approve state troopers driving Thornburg's son to school up in Massachusetts and all this kind of stuff. I don't think that's it. I think it's because that truck deal was being disclosed, and I think that Thornburg got West and prosecuted Bud Dwyer, and another person they don't know who's a good friend of mine is Bill Smith, and they prosecuted him in that thing. And it's just a sordid tale of abuse of government power in case after case. Joanne had asked me a question earlier, and at some point, about what motivates these people. One of the things that you had asked was, you know, where's the money connection? Because of the assumption. And, you know, I forgot. That truck deal was a good example. There was money corruption that they were ripping off the taxpayers, our transportation system, and lining their pockets. And, you know, disclosing that was of great danger to them. And Thornburg's also a very hateful person. I mean, he wants to get back at you for things, a very vindictive person. And I'd forgotten about that. You know, there was exposure, would have sent all of them probably to prison. I can't say Dick Thornburg had his fingers in it. but I know his staff did, his top staff did, because I know who they were and what they were doing. So there was a money connection. What I had discovered and complained about, and that what we had started complaining about when the FBI threatened me, was that truck deal. So maybe you're ultimately right in the question. I hadn't seen it that way, but I think I thought about that later, because I said, nah, I don't think it's money. I don't know of any money. I'd forgotten about that Hubco truck deal that we uncovered in our office.
1968 with RFK's campaign, where he said that if I see a wrong done, I have to try to do something about it.
Right.
You know, and what that meant, you know, and that's exactly what you're doing. You see what is wrong, and you're trying to make it right.
Well, that's exactly what happened, because the investigator that talked to me first about that truck deal was Tony Marcisa. He was an investigator for me in the Auditor General's office before he went down to Washington to get in the national scene and work on the Clinton campaign, and he ended up in the White House and a very high position. I think they became fearful that I was getting information from what are called black sources in the Attorney General's Department. Because one of the things that I wrote and complained about was the treatment of Marion Barry. Now, Marion Barry had drug abuse problems, but it was noticed by a lot of us who were involved. We'd go and we'd have these conventions and auditor generals and talk about things. It's amazing how much political goop you pick up. And it was obvious that Thornburg, I believed, was part of an effort to prosecute and investigate black politicians. And the reason was, and Thornburg was a very prominent Republican, to suppress black vote. And it's also obvious that the black vote is on 99%, 98, 99% Democrat. That may have been a motivation for them. Well, I wrote and I complained about some of this. And I did it in a way that you would think I knew something. Well, what do? My sources tell me up jumps Gordon Zubrod, gets called down to a meeting in D.C., and they have an emergency meeting about Don Bailey's letters. I'm making this system react and making these people react. And I think they developed a hatred for me. And by the way, I try to keep this thing nonpartisan because I don't believe it belongs in a partisan sphere. I think there's as much wrongdoing in both sides. I think the judiciary, you know, it's not partisan, I don't think. But I got a thing, and it started out, Don Bailey is involved in a shitstorm, that's a quote, in central Pennsylvania. I don't know where that is. I've got to find that. Anyway, I got such a kick out of it, I taped it on the wall of my law office, and it was a think tank. And I think that they would control certain things. That I had IRS attacks that we traced to Jay Waldman, who was one of Thornburg's aides and was a federal judge, appointed a federal judge, the inspector general for the IRS, and it was our inspector who helped me with this too. Had never seen a case of so much political abuse, so they had bounced my case back, trying to claim that they were trying to assess me humongous penalties, and it ended up being totally thrown out. They totally dumped. It was just fabricated stuff.
If they can take you out, there isn't anybody here that's going to represent the
No
people
one.
and raise these issues and try to go after them.
No one.
So you're far more of a threat than all these people that want to.
And
Yeah,
Jim,
and I want to mention, we interviewed people yesterday,
Yes.
okay? Some of your clients, because I just met you yesterday. We talked to some of your clients, and just to give you an idea, the kind of people that he's defending, one was a former police officer who we could not interview because in his new position, he received a gag order not to talk to the media, and I can't mention his name. The other was a couple who a woman dated the wrong guy, broke up with him, and he couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
And his brother worked for the police force, and they harassed him. Eventually, 5 different police forces here in Harrisburg were harassing these people, illegal search and seizure. They arrested them, it was ludicrous what went on, and nobody would do anything. Well, they had a criminal attorney who had all the files, charges dropped.
Right.
But then the harassment continued, and they had to come to you.
Right.
And
It
another
is.
was
It
an
is.
elderly man who had a property, a house, and he
Yes,
had
Larry.
cars on it, and the police wanted him to move the cars, and he wouldn't. And the end of the story was the police burned his house down. These are the kind of people that Don is defending because nobody else will. The girl who rented from the judge went to 15 lawyers or something, and
Yes, 15.
nobody would represent her because they were going up against a judge. And this is the whole civil rights thing. It's like, and I want to ask you this question: why should people watching this care about Don Bailey and about what Don Bailey does?
What's being done to me is an example of a judicial system that rides herd over lawyers. Lawyers do not have the courage to confront or speak up about judicial abuse. They're afraid to say anything or to fight back because they're afraid that if they do, the lawyer's disciplinary system, which is controlled by these judges, will be used as a vehicle to take their livelihood and their freedom to speak and their right to speak. And to the degree, because there are lawyers out there that care about their clients, most of them actually do tell people, I can't do it. I get referrals from all over the state, from out of state. I get them. I've gotten them from California, Florida, New York. And these people will inevitably tell clients, I can't represent, I know somebody that might do it. You can call Don Bailey, because they're afraid. I would suggest as a solution as to why people should care about this is, again, I'll go back to the Federalist Papers. You need a place to go and be able to settle civil disputes where you can get a fair and honest decision. Not a political-sized decision, not one that's determined by the basis of what the name of the law firm or the personal connection before the particular judge is. Not a decision that is affected by the broader political interest. For example, all of the state policemen I represent, they come to me because I'm successful, because I care about them, and because I win cases, identifying and rewarding them for suffering that they've had at the hands of the system. So what does the system do? It arranges things in a way so all of these cases get sent to the same judges. You go down to appeals to the Third Circuit, they're all sent to the panel after panel after panel, the same judge. Same judges doing the same things, saying the same things. The politics, the connections in the federal judiciary need to be exposed because every one of you, these huge decisions they make on finances, decisions that are being made in the housing crisis, on the mortgage crisis, the Federal Reserve issues that Mickey Paletta is working on. These issues are vitally important to the American people, but none is more important than their right to receive a fair hearing based on equal and fair applications of the law anywhere in the system. If you don't have that, you don't have an American society that's fair or egalitarian, and we don't have that. These people have got to be disclosed. You need a mechanism to go in and when you find judicial misconduct, have it looked at by somebody who is objective. And the second thing we need is this is going to sound stupid and you're probably going to hit me over the head for this, but we've got to have a law or some kind of statute that protects lawyers' rights, because the lawyer community, due to its lack of courage, unfortunately, is letting itself be squelched and controlled as a class, so that people that come to a lawyer to get a fair opinion and fair treatment can't get it because they're afraid to confront the system. That has to change.
Yeah, another thing that's troublesome is if you don't have that in place, right, to check the powers that be, that lets the powers from the top all the way down feel empowered to do whatever they want. Like what these 5 police stations harassing one couple because the woman quit dating one of the cop's brothers.
Correct.
And they were
Exactly.
completely empowered to do that because they knew no one would stand up to them.
And they know, believe me, they know. If you're in York County, they know if there's a problem with what goes on in that county, the abuse in that county, which considers itself the most Aryan supremacist, Ku Klux Klanish county in the entire United States. They say they've moved from Georgia to Pennsylvania and that they're proud of their being the center of this kind of stuff. At least some of them do some of it. That's exactly right. Word gets around, they know, they're not afraid. Defense lawyers come in, they lie, they distort things. It happens in case after case. And what happens is your system then is thrown out of kilter. It's no longer a respectful place to do business. I think, for example, Joanne, one of the institutions that has got to be looked at, has got to be evaluated, are our clerk's offices. The clerks for these courts assign cases. You go to the Third Circuit, they supposedly assign panels, although I fooled them. I called down there one time and found out that the judge was directing the panels himself. So, you know, it needs investigated. The Judicial Committee in the House of Representatives and in the Senate have got to look at these things.
We need to have some sort of true check and balance
Right.
over these people, which they have no authority to control.
Exactly.
And
Something that's an ombudsman kind of thing.
hey, constitutionally, we should be allowed to have the Council on Censors. This is something that used to exist. Now, would it be possible, because we'd have to get it on a ballot and we'd have to be able to vote this Council on Censors in, but then we'd be actually able to appoint people that can go around and file charges against the police for their corruption and the courts and not be under their jurisdiction. But, you know, what type of a battle would that be, trying to get this on the ballot and get enough votes for people to actually realize the purpose of this and what it's for? Because I'm sure it'd turn into a big smear campaign like they do for anything they don't want coming in. And, I mean, if we had that in place, we could check these judicial officers immediately.
I think the best place to begin is for the Congress to assert its jurisdictional authority over the appellates and lesser courts. They do not have the authority under the Constitution to control the U.S. Supreme Court to affect what they do. But most people don't realize that, and this is a very important word, that the U.S. Supreme Court is the only federal court of original jurisdiction. Now, that doesn't mean Congress can just run roughshod and do everything, and that's no good either. But they do have the authority under Article 3 to investigate some of these things and deal with laws. What could they do? They could take the absurd exaggerations and hyperbole of judicial immunity and write some decent law that would place a judge at jeopardy when they abuse somebody's rights. A judge on a bench enjoys no freedom from criminal investigation, okay? I'll give you an actual case. Judge sees an attorney walking down the street, doesn't like him, sends his tip staff out, grab the guy, hauls him into court, a bunch of stuff goes on. I think that judge may have been criminally pursued, I don't know, but civilly there's nothing you can do. He's performing what they call a judicial function, and judicial immunity has a use, but it's exaggerated, and the public doesn't know that. That judge can sit on the bench, he can lie, cheat, and steal. And if he's performing a judicial function when he does it, you can't do anything about it.
You know, we just recently got some information here that affects what we do at Citizens Reform Center. There was a judge who basically said that the plaintiff does not need to be present during a
Oh, I
trial.
heard about this morning.
I mean, this is
Unbelievable.
basically one of the cornerstones of our defense, is the plaintiff must be present. But one judge, here he is creating law, which he's not allowed to do, saying
Right.
the plaintiff is no longer required.
That a policy like that, to me, is clearly unconstitutional. I mean, if a plaintiff goes into court, they have a burden to maintain. If a plaintiff doesn't have appeared at court, just sends in a letter to sue Jim or sue Joanne, and you don't get a chance to confront the complainant. I mean, it's a fundamental due process
What can we
issue.
do about that?
Under the
There's
current
nobody-
system, I don't know where you can go.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do.
No.
He abridged your constitutional rights.
Right.
This is gonna hurt anybody because, I mean, if the plaintiff's not there, you can't cross-examine.
Correct.
And there's nothing we can do about it.
I don't think, under the current system, you could take an issue like that, you could make a request for declaratory relief, but it's going to stay within the system. And that's not to say that that conduct or that decision won't be overturned. That's a situation where a court makes an error or a judge makes an error that's very fundamental. I mean, there's no excuse for it, but and there's none, no excuse. I mean, it's so basic, it's like kindergarten.
It's
In it-
illegal.
Well, here, how about a situation where you do go into court, you have a hearing, and the judge, the next day, is in the back room in his chambers with his court reporter and directs he or she to change the transcript, to take things out that were said. And listen, I've actual cases, I've proven this. Do you know that the appellate court came back to me in the case where I established this and said, well, you know, you can go to the Judicial Disciplinary Board, but the judge is performing a judicial function. It's not a judicial function. It's an administrative function. It's also an illegal function. But they get away with it. And they get away with it because the system won't police itself.
Don, there are so many attorneys, way more attorneys than I'm sure we need in this country. And you're the only one who's willing to stand up for these people, sue judges. I mean, what would you say to other attorneys?
You know, you've got to come to terms. If you're going to practice law, you're representing another human being who's come to you, and you have a moral duty to give that 100%. You got a responsibility to that client to walk in their shoes and protect their rights, preserve their rights, extend their rights 100%. You've got a duty to do that. And if they're not doing that, I don't know what you do.
Have you ever come to where you might lose your license?
Well, I have definitely been threatened, and I think that right now I'm doing things that I can't talk about because I'm reacting to some of that, so I'm not free to do that. But the fact that I'm not free to do that is evidence itself of how abusive this system is. Who the hell cares? I don't care. I'll be happy to talk about it. I mean, you're going after lawyers in this country because they criticize the courts. What the hell does that say about the First Amendment? It says that it exists everywhere but in the court system.
Which is where it's needed most.
Which is where it's needed most. Until we do that, you know, you got committees already formed up. Impeach Judge Jones, impeach Judge Connor, impeach Judge Kane. You know, I got people that come to me that are talking about these things and doing these things all the time because they're sick and tired and fed up. It's getting to the stage where it's got to go to the street. It's got to start with the people and come up. Congressman, without mentioning his name because I don't think it's fair until he gets a chance to respond to further correspondence, writes back in response to a complaint put to him, well, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about this, like, it's not within my jurisdiction, but I hope it works out for you. Now, that's not me. The letter was not to me. The trouble with that is that here's an elected United States congressman that doesn't even know the power of the Congress. And I think that, I'm not saying that's unusual, but I think that the public is needed to organize an effort to do something about that. They got to do it through web pages. They got to do it through organizations like yours. They have to speak up and do something. The irony of all of this is the Supreme Court of the United States has the ultimate responsibility. And Congress, in fact, it was the Senate Judiciary Committee asked Justice, I think it was Justice Breyer, I don't think it was Roberts, I think it was Breyer, to do a report because of all the complaints that they had received about what was going on in the federal courts. And he did about a 1.5, 2-inch thick response. And, you know, I mean, that may be a helpful thing. That may help assist in getting some of these things straightened out, but it doesn't address the real problem. The real problem is, going back to a question, Joanne, you asked her, you know, why does this abuse occur? You know, what causes it to begin with, you know? Is it corruption?
What's the motivation?
What's the motivation?
Yeah.
And the motivation is really, it's just power and pomp and circumstance. And that's why checks on government officials from the very day this country started has been the primary focus of our constitutional system.
Do you have any support in your office, or is it just you?
Actually, it's a mom and pop operation. My wife, Adrian, has just done a phenomenal, incredible workhorse in doing the job there, getting things done. And it's what the stress has done to her, what it's done to my family, particularly her. She doesn't have the benefit of combat experience and pressures like that make things like this easier for me. I mean, what are they going to do, send me to Vietnam? So, you know, it's different. It's hard for her. And over and over again, you'll just hear her say, I can't believe this. I mean, she has learned so much, and she has just an absolutely fantastic mind for sifting and sorting through facts, but it's very emotional for her because she just can't believe what she's seeing.
And anybody else?
I'm a sole practitioner, but for example, there's a fellow in the office who actually, you know, we had a law firm at one point. He was not in favor of this, but I asked him to please not be in the law firm. It was he and I by that point. The attorney that had been there before felt because of the heat that was focusing on me that he had to leave. And he's a good person, and really is a good person. And we were very good friends. He felt he had to do what he had to do because of the heat being put on me, which he felt in some way I was earning, which means that, you know, I was attacking issues nobody would attack, and you draw fire when that happens. Andy did not want to break up the law firm. I asked him to do that. You know, ultimately, ironically, it didn't do him any good because he became a victim because of his association with me. And it's funny because
Wait, a victim in what way?
well, he's lost his license to practice law, and it's been taken away from him. And we have evidence, overt evidence, that the reason that happened was because he could or would or might help me. That's the kind of thing that I mean, that there needs to be an outside organization with authority to check out. There need to be restraints on. Pennsylvania's Lawyers Disciplinary Board is nationally known as the most oppressive, abusive organization of its type in the country. It's universally disrespected. It is abusive, authoritative, and it's used in a dishonest way. We found people that were running corrupt practices out of the disciplinary board itself. So they take this person and put them down doing certain clerical type functions to hide them from the investigator position they held. They get away with that stuff. There should have been a criminal investigation, but it doesn't occur. The system is corrupt. It's abusive and corrupt, and it needs to change.
Unless we can get the judicial system to back off and stop threatening these attorneys and pulling their licenses, it's going to keep happening.
People don't want to give their lives up anymore. They don't want to give their house or their car or their paycheck.
But the danger is they're going to lose all that stuff through a process that's where people with the weighty power and the big law firms are going to come in and they're going to win these cases. And, you know, the judicial selection process, it needs to be examined and looked at. You've got U.S. senators recommending people, putting these enclaves or groups of judges together. You got a couple federal judges down there. A good example would be Judge Jones. Judge Jones was chairman of the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board. He was sued in a First Amendment civil rights suit. What he had done, he's supposedly gone in and offended the rights of students, I think, at Pitt, something like that. So what he did was he sued. He had attorney's fees, as I read these things, of over $100,000 assessed against him. One of the attorneys that worked on that was the attorney that worked with the law firm that's filed frivolous attorney's fee sanctions against me that was, my view was plain and simply a setup. And then he's appointed as a U.S. district judge. He's never been a judge. I don't know what kind of lawyer he is, a good one or a bad one, but he's politically, he was very well connected. Was a finance chairman of Governor Tom Ridge's campaign, co-chairman with our current governor, Tom Corbett. They were co-chairman. Corbett gets sued. I did write this one. You know who the case was assigned to? Judge Jones, former co-chair of the finance committee on Tom Ridge, Governor Tom Ridge's campaign. That somebody was in Jones's office, and one of Judge Jones's staff members said that, proudly declared, we've never had a plaintiff's verdict in this courtroom. Well, that's just really nice. I mean, that's nice for a judge, a federal judge, to be proud
of it,
of something like that. The primary responsibility and the primary reason for the existence of federal courts is to preserve citizens' access against government abuse. That's their primary. I heard Judge Gothrop, he's passed on, give a lecture to a jury about that very fact, what the purpose of the federal court was. And he emphasized over and over again during that presentation that we are here to preserve your rights, to preserve your access, your window on American freedom and the right to express them. And then here's a judge who has staff people that are saying that they're proud of the fact that no plaintiff ever got a verdict in this courtroom. I mean, that's sick. The biggest single item of control that's got to be dispensed with is the control of courts over lawyers. Lawyers have to be free to express their displeasures and their criticism of the court when the courts depart from procedural and substantive principles that are important to American freedom.
Thank you very much for coming and talking with us. Jim, do you want to add anything?
Don, what he's doing is exactly what this country needs. It's what the court systems need. Don needs your support. They are trying to shut him down. They've been trying for a while, but it's getting worse. We want your support. You know, pay attention to what's going on. Write letters. Send letters to your congressman. Let's let as many people know what is going on as possible. We need to support this man that is standing up for the civil rights of the people, which without them, we are no longer America. We're going to be America spelled with a K. And we have to do this because our country is going downhill so fast with this judicial system, and there's no way to stop it at this point. Thank you for everything that you've done.
Well, thank you for
keep up the battle. God bless you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a privilege to have an opportunity, and it's really been a catharsis for me to get some of this out. And I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.